Welcome, guys. So this is our weekly 8FM book club live discussions, and we are continuing on with influence, and we are now into chapter 4, social proof. So really interesting chapter. Every chapter has been interesting, but this one kind of escalated from, laughter, like what do they call it? Canned laughter to like mass suicide. So interesting chapter. Definitely lots of, things to kind of address, right? And even like, things to apply in our business. I think it's, we all kind of understand the importance of social proof, right? We see it on our own stuff, right? But in these contexts, it's kind of crazy and leaves me asking myself too, like how I would respond and react in all of these situations, right? And it's like, it's just, I guess you never really know until you're in it. And I think it's so, starting off like the story with in New York, the woman that was getting kind of chased and stabbed. And there was over 30 people watching, her neighbors, and just continued to watch. And it was crazy to think that everyone was just kind of working off of each other's reactions. And it's like crazy that would happen, that, even because he even shares statistics that there are some people that are more likely to kind of be, 5% that are more likely to kind of initiate action, whereas 95% of people will more, I guess, follow what's going on. So even within those 30 people, I would still think that someone would do something. It's crazy. And part of me almost doesn't want to believe it, right? He kind of dissected how the newspapers kind of approached it, that we live in this society now that doesn't care anymore. And then just into this thing of, how we respond to people around us. But even that just makes it hard to believe, right? Let's, whoever wants to pop out and what stood out to you guys and how you feel about all this.
Yeah, I'll jump out. I found it fascinating, the concept that if you need help, or if something's happening, that it's actually kind of being amongst a crowd of people uncertain whether you're really needing help or not, or whether it's actually an emergency or not. It's actually less helpful than if you just approach one person and ask for help. They're much more, if you have a one-on-one kind of interaction and clearly say say something to them, they're much more likely to feel they're personally responsible for the decision. Whereas if it's just sort of a general group, then that, like he was talking about, uncertainty being the factor of people not making a decision. It's not necessarily that they don't care, but they kind of automatically bounce off the reactions of everyone else. And if it's sort of not clear whether it's definitely they need to, it's a called for action kind of situation, if they're not sure, they just don't do anything. And so a really practical thing he said was just reach out to one person, say, you in the blue shirt, call the ambulance, or or call the police, or whatever it is, but be specific, talking to one person. And then they just switch into, oh, it's personal, I need to make a decision here and I'm going to take action. I thought that was just really fascinating, the uncertainty piece. And if you're in a situation where you need someone's attention, to be specific. And then he was he gave the example of a car accident where something had happened and then people were just driving past, but a car was closest, and he sort of looked at them and said something to them, and then they pulled over and took action to help. And then all these other people stopped and helped. But before that, they were just driving straight past. So, fascinating. I'll pass it on.
Well, I'll come out and talk about that a little bit that Terry talked about. I've been trained in emergency medical stuff. So it was really fascinating because they tell you, it's been 20 years since I've been trained, right? I guess this book is about that old or so. But they tell you, look somebody in the eye, say, you call the ambulance, you do this, you do that, you do the other. it was fascinating reading the science behind it, right? Why they teach you to do that. Because that's exactly what they've always taught me to do since I was 16, right? They taught me that you always do that. But the other side of that, I guess, is once people see someone in need and understand that it's a genuine need, then more and more people are stopping. So I thought that was pretty good. On the other side, humanity is willing to help if they know someone needs help. I experienced the New York thing when I was in New York myself with my mother. I was 16 and we were walking down the sidewalk. And we're from Denver, right? So we're Hicks in New York. And we were with my cousin and he's walking ahead on Times Square. And my mother was wearing high-heeled boots. And her boot got caught in a grate and she fell. No one looked at her. They didn't break a smile. They didn't do anything. They just looked around and walked around her. I'm laughing so hard I can't help her up. No one helped her up. No one helped her up and no one cracked a smile. I mean, here we'd be helping you up and laughing at you. But it is interesting that murder happened in New York and they talked about how different it is, because I don't think where I live, we even in apartments, we'd let a murder happen and not do anything about it. So I think it's the different communities and what they're used to. You don't get involved or you get in trouble, you might get killed. It's weird. Somebody else's turn.
So I even texted Kat this. I think it's really funny. The Werther effect or whatever. I've never heard of that before, and I thought it was really interesting how they. I don't know. This was what I wrote down because I wrote a little sticky note on this one because I was really interested. And there was another part, but I forgot to write the sticky note. But referring to the suicide article in this book, my observation is that the same is like watching the news. I don't watch the news, and I haven't watched it in years because it's depressing. You know, there's nothing good on the news. I mean, the same thing with like Facebook and stuff like that. But how the same thing is, like one person commits suicide, or right here it says like, what does it say? He found that within 2 months, every front page suicide story, an average of 58 people than usual killed themselves. Okay. So in a sense, each suicide story killed 58 people who otherwise would have gone on living. That makes me think like, okay, so it's true that people that watch the news and read all these like negative articles are a little bit more depressed. And I don't know where I heard that from. I've heard it a couple of years ago that when you watch the news, people become more depressed. And I think that's true because my mom, for instance, she watches the news religiously. I mean, it's like morning news, 12 o'clock news, 4 o'clock news, 5 o'clock news, 6 o'clock news, 8 o'clock news, 10 o'clock news. You know, it's like all day kind of thing. And my mom is a very angry person, like constantly is angry. And I think a lot of it has to do with, you know, what we're watching and what, you know, if people are reading this article about all these suicides, well, then of course I think that's going to happen. You know, if they started doing that, well, I mean, they do it on the TV and the news and the Facebook and everything like that. So I see that a lot now. And now I'm able to relate, okay, well, this is because people are reading this and we are so influenced by what we see every single day and how people are just continue to broadcast like all this negative stuff. Well, of course, we're going to be negative. So that was like the biggest takeaway in this chapter for me is like, okay, this stuff is true. Like, even now to this day, it's still true. And then kind of going off like what y'all said, Leslie and Terry, it was so funny. The other day, actually, we were on a Zoom call and I had to jump off real quick. There was like a lot of banging and my husband was like, hey, there's like a lot of stuff going on outside. And I guess my neighbor was having some issues, right, with some gal. I don't know what happened. But anyways, all of the neighbors called the police and we had like 6 cop cars here. And I was like, well, that was kind of weird, because then I read the chapter and I was like, whoa, so 58 people didn't, or 38 people or whatever it was, didn't call the cops when this chick was getting murdered in New York. There was not a murder going on. There was just a lot of banging and yelling across, like next door to me, but all the neighbors called the cops, you know? And so I thought it was kind of interesting to see the difference, especially like with the book being much older and now. But I mean, I don't think it's changed, because people aren't opted, like, they don't really want to do things because they think, oh, that person next to me is going to do it, or this person's going to do it, or they've already all done it, you know? And so I really liked this chapter. I thought it was really good. That's what I got. Next.
Yeah, well, I didn't really reread it because I unfortunately been really busy since I came home from my trip to South Carolina. But it's funny. It's one of my favorite chapters. Social proof is huge. I don't know if you guys, I think it was Stanford. I'm pretty sure it was a study in Stanford. I think it was done in the 70s. Actually, there's a movie about it too. And basically what the study, it's also about social proof, social psychology. And basically what the study shows is they took a bunch of students and then they made half of the students prisoners and half the students actually guards. And then they saw how that psychology of all of a sudden you're a guard and you're a prisoner, how would that really affect them, even though they're just students, right? And that doesn't change. They're students no matter what. And it's not a real prison, okay? And then there were rules that were implemented in the system where it was like the guards were not allowed to do physically hurt them or anything, and the prisoners were supposed to do certain things. And human nature is human nature, you guys. It doesn't matter if it's in 1800s, 1900s, the 2000s. We're all still the same psychology-wise. We all have the same neurotransmitters and everything. And so in the study, the guards completely started acting like what guards act like, because they had power, and the prisoners started acting like prisoners. Some of them acted like they all of a sudden they weren't, like some of these guys beforehand were like really strong personalities, and all of a sudden when they became prisoners, they weren't anymore. And it was just because in their head they thought, wow, I'm a prisoner, And I mean, it's just the psychology of it. So this book, the chapter is all about social proof, and it just goes to say that what we think and what we see other people do, we become like too, And there are certain people who just innately are the 5% of the world who just innately have something about themselves. They're just really true leaders, and they're going to go against the grain. And it doesn't matter if they're prisoners or if they're guards or if they're, a slave even. It's been shown in studies that has to do with people that are in the slaves too. So I don't know. I always think it's pretty interesting, and culture does play into it. I just spent 9 days in South Carolina. And I've lived in Southern California, and I live in Washington State now. Let me tell you something. The cultures are vastly different in all three of those states. And it plays a huge difference. I mean, in the South, everyone is very taught to watch out for your neighbor. Like you just said, Heather, to take care of your neighbor, watch out for your neighbor also means they're kind of nosy sometimes too, by the way. But, and then when you go to Southern California, it's a lot more like New York, by the way. People are not going to necessarily, if something's happening, they're not going to necessarily call or anything. And up here in Washington, it's more of a very cliquey, it's more like Denver a lot. I've been to Colorado a lot too. It's more like Denver, that kind of personality, Colorado. But, yeah, it's very interesting. I love the chapter. I wish I could remember specifics about it. I'm sorry, I do remember the New York thing and suicide, but either way, it's just, if you guys ever get a chance to watch that movie, I forget the Stanford experiment or something like that. It vastly will show you what social proof does. It's really good. So anyway.
So really awesome. And welcome on, Elizabeth. And yeah, I mean, it makes me think about my experience. I've lived kind of in different places throughout my life. So I was born in Poland, and then kind of my family wanted to leave Poland because it was communist. Then when I was 4, we left Poland, lived in Germany for a year, and then moved to Canada, and then lived in Canada most of my life, and then moved to Costa Rica. And it's so different. For me, there's definitely a lot to adapt to, because the culture, obviously there's a huge culture difference between Costa Rica and even just going to Toronto. And it's it was this weird kind of adjustment where, I go to Toronto and it's kind of colder, this colder atmosphere. Everyone has their own personal space, right? You don't really look each other in the eye. And if someone does, what's wrong? Right? Whereas here, you can literally go anywhere and everyone will say hi to you. It's just, people wave to you in the car and drive by and say hola, and everyone is very friendly. And I remember when we first came, I was more cautious, right? I was really cautious and scared and, listened to all the stories of what my family told me, that it would be dangerous and all these things, but it's so not true. And it's just, it's funny because then I had to adjust as well. And I've changed a lot too in how I am. And so when I go to Toronto, step out into the airport and no one's friendly, I'm kind of surprised at first, but then it sort of, kicks in. I'm like, okay, I know where I am now, right? But it's funny to me. And and this story too of, the Jonestown suicides where was it? They were in San Francisco, right? And then went to South America, just in the middle of nowhere, right in Guatemala. That is because I live in like the middle of like the jungle. I have one neighbor, and it makes me think though, because there's like a sense of isolation, right? There's still that, because that other side that Terry was talking about, this idea of uncertainty, and then the other thing is similarity, right? Who we actually relate to, and the more that people would relate to someone, the more they're likely to act like that person, right? So whether if they're reading about the suicides or just anything. So this whole story of how everyone just went to drink this poison and then just kind of, but what makes me think is like, I'm interested in the 5%. I'm interested in, that first person that got up and took the drink, right? And the ones that actually are, I don't know what it is, Julianne, you're talking about like this innate kind of leadership. Well, I think things are developed. I think people develop certain traits, dependent also on how they grow up. And people can grow up in different ways, but have, like twins can grow up, right? I mean, we're getting into totally different subjects here, but right, it makes me think like, what is that one person? Why is that one person going to do something slightly different and see something different? And I think it has a lot to do with awareness. And because he always ends the chapters with how to say no. I think he must be like this funny guy, because just the way he writes and the his terms and stuff, and almost like the way he perceives himself, I think is kind of interesting. Has a bit of a negative kind of like approach, which I always allude to, but how to say no. And it's just, I think at every stage in all of these chapters, it's having the awareness, and then having the awareness, the self-awareness of what's happening, and being able to consciously say, what needs to happen next, or how am I actually responding or reacting to this. So I think that, and I think as marketers, we develop that because we are studying psychology. We're studying people and how people respond. And so we also see ourselves, right? We see what we do because we learn from that. So all of this, I think, is fascinating. And we know why and how to kind of what to apply in our business to create more social proof and things like that, and what kind of effect that can have on our results, right? So all of these things I think are really interesting. Alicia,
yeah.
Elizabeth. Sorry, Terry.
Oh no, if the others want to jump out, but I had going on to that how to say no part, I found that really cool, how he just sort of said, there's it's become the norm to have these sort of falsely created testimonials, like on TV commercials. It's obvious there's an actor reading something, or sort of, sort of looks unscripted, but you can tell, so, and that's just, he's sort of like, really is kind of raising the flag of how just that's so not cool to be tricking people with false testimonials. And I think as saying no, I think it was great. He was like, as soon as you identify that someone's sort of putting in sort of false evidence that's meant to be social proof, that you can just, if you can identify that in the moment, then you can turn off your automatic reaction to kind of wanting to go along just because it's this automatic, social proof kind of response of wanting to do that. And you can just turn it off and sort of cut that automatic response and make your own choice from that point, like kind of call it out. And I think on the flip side of that, as marketers, how crucial it is that we're always just acting in full integrity with our social proof. Like, it's just, it kind of goes without saying, especially in our community where, we do real social proof. But I think it's just so important that it's congruent, it's real, it's full of integrity. But I liked that if you can just switch your brain, if you're kind of getting done over by social proof in a situation where someone's selling you something, just to catch that awareness, and then it kind of like cuts the automatic response, and then you can make your own choice. Yeah.
Which kind of makes you think about the canned laughter, though. Right? Because then everyone still says that they know that it's fake. The laughter is fake. They don't like it, but they keep putting it in, and there's still some sort of response that happens, even though there's an awareness that it's fake. It's weird, right? It's still like it just shows that maybe it's still kind of that awareness. I don't know.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, he was sort of saying that in the more of context of like just a one-on-one selling situation where you're being sold something just on a one-on-one to be able to catch that awareness. But yeah, it's a fascinating thing because it's like in that laughter example, it kind of just still works even though you kind of know. It's just a fascinating thing.
Do you think fake testimonials work too, the same way fake laughter does?
Probably.
Did you hear David's thing yesterday about that? He was talking about how, like, if you had a great story and getting people to, and then he was saying how they had people in the front just like trained to lean forward as they did a certain part of the story, and then act as though they wanted to buy, and they'd have people getting up there and buying stuff that they had no idea that they were buying. The product itself didn't even have to be, it could have been, and yet he thought it was amazing how just a good story, a good testimonial, the ones that people can actually relate to, and we learn that too is when we're talking to people about why they should. I mean, I also do this other business too, Zeal for Life, but you figure out what would relate to them, as what part of your story would relate to them, whether it's in that case, whether it's their health or whether they want to make more money. In our case, in the case of Empower, of course, it's relating to people about, letting them kind of presenting the problem of, oh wow, you wish you had more time, you want to spend time with your family, and having that relatable story. But I thought the canned laughter thing was funny too, because like people, it is annoying, and yet people still keep watching the programs. Obviously, it's kind of like, it's almost insulting, like what I wasn't supposed to know how to laugh at that, or that wasn't even funny anyway, or. But this other thing, this reminded me of a psychology experiment that my then we were dating, and he was doing this experiment where he had a guy, and it was two different scenarios. In one case, he had a really amazing looking model-like girlfriend, and in the other one, he had kind of I think it was the same girl, but she kind of like really like made herself look really plain and awful. And then they asked the people their opinion of the guy, and based on, and you can probably imagine that when he was with the girl, when she was just absolutely voluptuous and wonderful looking, he got higher marks, so to speak. They thought better of him. They thought he was successful and stuff than when he was with somebody who wasn't as attractive. And so just an audience, just a audience of young people. I think they did it. They used that they used to do all kinds of stuff on psych classes. You took a psych class, you got to be a guinea pig. But I thought that this kind of thing, this social proof, kind of reminded me of that experiment of, that you see other people based on what you think other people think of them, if that makes sense. So that's all I have.
Yeah, that's interesting. It makes it like, even like this idea of like similarity, right? Like the relatability that you're talking about, Elizabeth. So it makes me think like because we're marketing, right? We market to different niches, different audiences. but from personal experience, I always end up, I guess, when it comes more from my personal experience, because we can go across different niches, right? But if we can't relate ourselves to that niche as much, it affects the marketing, right? Even though we technically know how, we know the principles and strategies behind marketing and like kind of market message match. But if I personally can't relate enough, then it's still, there's a disconnect. So it's like, it's interesting because, I mean, it still shows that you market from yourself. And I guess that's what kind of comes through.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Like in terms of like, you can market from yourself in terms of, depends upon what part of the product, or why would the person want to buy a product. And you have to, if you have a story that matches either financially, they want to spend more time with their family, or they have tons of money, but they don't have any time, or they don't have any money and they have tons of time and no money. You can market based on, I mean, and it could still be your own story. I mean, obviously if you're like in terms of your story, yours and Romeo's story is so universal. Like, we were in these dead end jobs. I mean, we weren't going anywhere. And it was just like, is this all there is to life? And you have people go, yeah. And then all of a sudden they don't want to go to their telemarketer job anymore. So yeah.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing, you're talking about psychology, is just the connection. The biggest thing you can do, and even if you think about social proof, that's the same thing, it's connection. So whether or not, like, for example, Kat, you live in Costa Rica, I live in Seattle, so geographically, we really don't have a connection if you think about it. But I'll say to you, like, if you notice, I'll come out and I'm like, hey, Kat, we were looking at going to Costa Rica. So automatically you're like, oh, I can talk to her. I can tell her about Costa Rica, So that's kind of like really when it comes to marketing, you want to find a connection, whatever. It's like Terry, I'll say, Terry, hey, my daughter's going to Australia. Hey, can, you help me out with that? Or I'll say, oh, Leslie, hey, my best friends in Fort Collins, where's the best place I can take her to lunch when I'm visiting? I'm just saying, like, those are just examples of connection, and that's really, it's marketers. We're just trying to take whatever part of our story and get as many people out there to connect with us, and that's what you do with the niche. That's why you go for a niche. And that's just like the whole thing. If you look at influence, he's very much, actually, by the way, Kat, my boyfriend met him, and he says a long time ago, like a long, long time ago. And he says he's actually got the driest sense of humor you'll ever meet. So, but yeah, it's like connect. So yeah, it's all about connection and social proof. And that's why, I'm always curious about the 5%er, especially like for me, I come from this huge family. My dad died when I was 7. Then I just went back to South Carolina. So I'm all about trying to figure out my family, my culture, and my history. And the weird thing is I'm so different than all my siblings. So I'm trying to understand what is it that makes me so different, than them. And so I'm trying to find my connection to my dad because I'm hoping that's it. But I think that's just our human nature. That's what we're always looking for, is connection. So.
And I can totally relate to that too, because that's the same for me. I was always the weird odd one out.
Look at us, we're connection. Everything in life is about connection. I like Aunt Myrtle because I think of Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. It's like, so it's just like, it's funny.
Yeah, awesome. And Alicia, do you want to come out and share anything?
I'm good. Thank you, Kat.
Okay, thanks for coming on.
Yes, I'm here absorbing everything. I'm multitasking, and I hate that. And I appreciate all this. I've actually gained so much from you guys' insights that it's really helping me. Thanks.
Awesome. So if anyone has any closing thoughts, we can end out the Zoom soon. If not, I think we... I don't know, this one I found like it was fascinating in the sense of like how I would, like, trying to imagine myself in those scenarios. That's what made me think the most, like, what would I do? So next week we have chapter 5, Liking the Friendly Thief. So we'll get into that next week. And, for those of you that are watching the replay, if you have any questions or comments or feedback, then, comment and let us know. And obviously everyone is welcome on. And so thank you, ladies. Thanks for coming on. Fantastic discussion. Always am left with a lot to chew on. And appreciate you. See you guys next week.
Bye, guys.